touch on are just some of the typical barriers you know, encounter when starting out on this process, the goals and objectives for the project that Worldwise pursued, and then go into some details around the employee survey and then the governance structure for the green team. So some of the typical barriers that you'll see, you know, and I think just about any of these, I think we've all encountered at some point in our working careers. And I think when you start looking at how to implement sustainability with a company, these are the things that almost always pop up as some of the top of mind issues. You know, things that like folks are already overworked, have a lot on their plate. Sometimes they're just unsure of where to start, or there isn't that clear vision and they don't feel empowered to be able to move that forward. And then, you know, in some cases there's just no budget for it, or there's maybe even a competition for resources or who should be doing what. So, you know, these are some common things that you can see, but I think really, you know, the challenges and barriers that each company faces are unique to itself. What's going to be the number one or number two barrier for one company is likely not going to be the same for another. While it'll sort of, you know, likely pull from one of these 8 up on the screen, it's going to look different for each company. And so to really be able to, you know, adapt and sort of, you know, build with that in mind, if you want to go to the next slide. What you tend to see are, you know, different ways of approaching barriers. But in order to do that, you need to identify what barriers it is you actually have to get around. And so working with Worldwise, we sort of landed on sort of a 3-phase project, where at first we would have an employee survey, then a green team, and then a sustainability action plan. And I'll let Sarah talk a little bit about kind of why Worldwise wanted to pursue the project, because I think that really speaks a lot to, you know, hopefully where some of you guys are maybe looking at getting started with sustainability, or maybe even building from an existing program that you have.
Thanks. So I don't know if you all know Worldwise. We make sort of pet accessories, toys, scratchers, that kind of fun stuff. Our products have always had environmental benefits to them, and as our company has grown and expanded over the 20 years I've been here, you know, not everyone has the same knowledge and certainly not the same passion for sustainability as that original core group who founded the company. And so we thought it would be a good way to educate and promote sustainability not only around our products, but also in our day-to-day business in our office environment. So I went to PSC and said, what do we need to do to get this off the ground? And they hooked us up with Nick. And frankly, I was a little skeptical about the employee survey at first. I was like, can we just hit the ground running? I'm an efficiency kind of gal. But Nick explained all the things he's explaining to you, and it actually really did give us a lot of good insights about how our employees think about sustainability, what they know and what they don't know, and what they see as their hurdles. And that information allowed us to work with Nick to not only develop the structure for the green team and the process we go through, but also develop a list of potential projects that we could start working on so we didn't have to pick them out of thin air.
Awesome. And so I think you can go ahead and move to the next slide as well. So I think with the employee survey, there's a couple key things to actually make it worthwhile to pursue. You know, I think as, you know, Sarah had highlighted, that skepticism that she had, I think is common for a lot of folks, because we all take surveys at different times, and some of them are useful and a lot of them really aren't. And I think for an employee survey, when you're looking at sustainability, there's a couple key things you have to make sure you do and execute well in order to really get the value out of it. The first is that you just kind of have to really, you know, clamp down to make sure you don't have sort of a high level of fatigue with the survey. So, you know, just setting a firm time limit of it really should not be longer than 10 minutes. And then really making sure that there's a good mix of questions. So whether that's multiple choice, like a 1 to 5 sliding scale, or even having, you know, some open-ended questions. Even though that is a little bit more work on the back end, I think a few of those open-ended questions are really, really important to have. And then generally we find, you know, a pretty good response rate, keeping a survey open for about 2 weeks, sending out a few reminders for folks. And this is also a great time where if you're trying to start a green team or be, you know, able to identify who might be interested in joining a green team, having that as a part of the survey is a really good way as well. And then, the last is just providing a few, key things where you might be able to have some incentives for folks, whether it's, just a simple like Starbucks gift card or Amazon gift card. Some of those things can actually go a long way to bumping up a response rate by another, 10 or even 20%. So really, with the employee survey, the goal of it is to be able to identify where are existing employees in the company, how are they perceiving sustainability, and really what are their knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And so there's a couple great questions that you can ask that are really easy for folks to respond to, but are actually then very, very insightful for you to figure out how to move sustainability forward. So the first is kind of that open-ended question here of what do you think it means for a business to practice sustainability? Sustainability is one of those things everybody has a different personal definition or sort of working definition related to their job. And so it's really important to be able to identify where there are areas of alignment across an organization and maybe where there's some gaps. Or, on some surveys, I have seen a pretty strong contingent of folks that really don't see sustainability as a value add for the business or personally are interested in it. And so that's where that sliding scale on a 1 to 5 is really good to have as a part of a survey, because then you can identify if, employees really are on board, or if there's, some employees that are very, very hesitant because they don't see it as a value add for the business. And I think going to the next slide, there's some interesting sort of results that came out of the Worldwise survey that I'll let Sarah speak to.
Thanks. So we actually had a really good engagement on the survey. According to Nick, I don't know anything about these things. And we learned that most respondents do believe that sustainability was important to our business, which was really great. It meant that people who responded to our survey are on board. Most people said that product sustainability was most important, which makes sense given that our products already have environmental benefits to them. But they also thought there was a gap between the perceived quote-unquote good sustainability of our products and the fair to poor sustainability of our office environment and our day-to-day business. And so what came out of this was Nick was able to develop a list of possible tasks for our sustainability action plan that would address both of these concerns and, expand upon our product sustainability, but also improve the places that people saw holes.
Perfect. And I think, going to the next slide, I think another interesting sort of outcome from the survey, and one of the things that, in my experience is always really important to ask is, where are some of the internal hurdles that employees are facing? And so this is something where, you can provide them with a few items to select and then also provide kind of that other or write-in field there. And this is something where generally employees, are fairly honest with a lot of this, asking, letting us know where they are facing challenges or where they're really unsure for the company and sustainability. And I think that was something that for Worldwise, I think there was a couple key areas, right, Sarah, that kind of popped up that were things that then we were able to build from going forward.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of concern about time. Everyone's overworked, and there's a lot of concern about making sure that, like my manager will give me time to do this. And so we built that into the structure that Nick's going to go through. We wanted to make sure that all the departments were engaged to make sure that it was sort of fair and everyone's opinions were heard and represented. And also that we had, senior team buy-in, from the start, but also on the more important projects that we do to make sure that it's sort of a top-down approval. So like, the whole company understands that the senior team is behind this.
Yeah. Thanks. And so I think we can go ahead 2 slides just for the interest of time for everybody. So, taking the results from that employee survey, we're able to then know where there are barriers, where there are challenges, and where there may be opportunities. So, where were we able to crowdsource some ideas that employees and folks were really excited about the company pursuing, or even, maybe wanted to sort of be the champion or lead. And so then the question becomes, how do you move that forward? And I think a lot of organizations just kind of, do what I've kind of called here like the traditional green team of, hey, does anybody actually want to work on a green team? It's a very informal ask, and generally there's a couple champions that, jump up and, get together and have a meeting, but there's no real structure behind it, and it's, extremely volunteer-led. And generally, these are groups that might have some momentum in the beginning, but then generally run into those barriers that are identified in the employee survey and end up losing sort of momentum, and then they kind of stall out or even in some cases kind of fall apart. So what we really wanted to do with Worldwise was take the results from the survey and actually figure out what is the best way to structure a green team internally. And so looking at the next slide, I think there's a couple best practices here that really, work for just about any company. But is that, you have to have a system that's in place that's reflective of what's happening on the ground. So if everybody's overworked, that's something that needs to be considered. If there's no budget or no senior level support, then those are challenges that really have to be addressed pretty quickly. And so what we did with Worldwise was kind of, sit down, define what success looks like. So ultimately, what are they looking to get out of a green team? And then starting small. This is something where you can just start at the office level. It doesn't have to be a big project. You don't have to be looking at, putting solar on a warehouse or a manufacturing plant. You can sort of start small at the employee level. And then another key part is to really make sure that there's good departmental representation. So in that example of kind of the traditional green team, generally what happens is you get, a handful of folks, but that green team then is not representative of the company as a whole. And so I've seen instances where there's a green team and the company thinks it's just absolutely great. And then you come to find out that there's one person from HR, one person from marketing, and one person from like office operations. But meanwhile, the company is a product-based company, and they're moving things forward based off of manufacturing and sort of some other facilities. But it's something where those departments then did not have a seat at the table. And so that's something we'll talk to a little bit more later. But it's something I think that is really important to make sure that green team represents the diversity of the company from a departmental standpoint. And then the other is there needs to be a process to engage senior executives. It doesn't necessarily mean that those senior executives have to be on the green team, but you need to know sort of the processes that need to be put in place for how those senior executives will be engaged by who and how often. And then last is just to sort of keep it that genuine for the company. Make sure it's something that folks can relate with and that doesn't seem like it's just something that's being forced on everybody. And so looking at the next slide, there's sort of 4 key areas that I suggest most companies look at when they're starting a green team. So before you even start thinking of individuals that might be interested or that you would pull in, I think there's a couple key sort of roles for a green team. And those are things like an influencer. So this might be somebody who has a good standing internally with the company who others sort of look to and sort of would be the one that could easily, if they start doing a certain practice, others will start to follow. And then there's a facilitator, and so those are really the folks that, are strong project managers. A decision body, so this can be, senior executives. It can be VPs, or it can be, whatever it is for your organization. But those are the folks that really have the authority to say yay or nay to certain, sustainability initiatives. And then the last one there is really the implementation. And so those would be the folks who are actually able to make something happen on the ground. And so that's where all 4 of these could be a part of a green team. I think generally you'll see that what tends to happen is you have some folks that are in that implementer category that kind of form that initial green team, and then there's nobody to the left there, so no influencer, facilitator, or decision body, and that's where they lose momentum. So that's, again, where as you're looking at having that diverse departmental representation, making sure that you're also able to sort of hit some of these key buckets is really important to making sure that you have the right folks at the table. And so a simple structure that I've seen work with a lot of companies is, you have that green team there in kind of the upper right. And that can be really sort of any of those folks who are interested, but at least one person from each department. And that team really sort of acts as the folks that are, championing this. They're figuring out what are potential initiatives the company could pursue. And then as needed, there's sort of a senior executive like sustainability sponsor. So this would be somebody who sits on the green team, but then is also somebody who can, present and talk to that senior executive team. And so that's where if the green team has certain items that might be more resource intensive from a budget or a time perspective, that senior executive could then take those ideas and help make a pitch to that senior executive team. And then there's sort of the additional staff, which are sort of the implementers. So that would be something where maybe the green team figures out how to do, an office recycling and composting program. The senior executive sponsor makes the pitch to the executives, that then gets approved, and then sort of all staff are there implementing. And so this is just kind of a very simple chart, but something that I think is, at least a starting place. And then where we sort of netted out with Worldwise was a little different system, but again was reflective of their operation. So looking at the next slide, you'll see that there's sort of a couple other key roles here. Oh, Cardelise, can we move forward one?
Not the right slide, slide 18.
I'm sorry. Oh, it just switched. Thanks. There's a little bit of a lag there. So that custom green team,
There's a delay. Yes, I switched it.
Okay, thanks. So this custom green team is sort of the structure that we ended up implementing with Worldwise. And so that's where in that upper left you have that sort of sustainability or green team with a folk from each department. And then we've kind of identified that there were some other folks that are influencers there internally. So there's sort of the opportunity to have those cultural change leads is what we call them. So these would be folks who maybe aren't on a green team, but if you're to start that office composting program, you would want these individuals participating because their actions are then going to be followed by others. And then the other part was sort of looking at how decisions will be made. So that sustainability team can come up with a lot of great ideas from, that office composting program to maybe some sustainability attributes for new product launches to, putting solar on the roof to employee transit programs, the list goes on and on. What is then needed is how do you actually evaluate those decisions and who ultimately is going to sign off on saying sort of yay or nay on that. And so that's where being able to map out this sort of anatomy of the decision is really, really important, because then what that allows you to do is collect the information you need to be able to empower the key decision makers to say yes or no to something. And just mapping that process out for some companies increases the effectiveness of the green team like 100 times over. And so I'm going to let sort of Sarah talk a little bit about how we put together a structure for Worldwise, and then I think we can sort of wrap up and have some questions and answers.
Yeah, this slide actually is like the key one for me, because this is where it all came together and I really understood how all these boxes and people work together. And I think the really key part of it for us is this, the third one down that says, does the proposed idea cost more than so much money or requires more than so much time? And that's the box that got the senior team really on board, because it meant that they could set whatever they wanted that money and time to be. And so we weren't just going to be running rampant and doing whatever we wanted and spending all this money and doing all that. They had some control over it. And I think that's what really got them on board, and also is what's going to enable us as the green team to determine and really make progress and not be stymied by, well, who do we need to check with and what do we need to do, and well, how is this going to impact things? And so what we're really doing now is we've only had a few meetings so far, but what we're doing is identifying the projects we want to work on. What do we think they're going to cost the company? How much time do we think they're going to take? And then take those ones that are above the threshold to the senior executives and get buy-in, and the ones that are under, we can just run with. And I think that structure has been really, really helpful to us in order to make the team feel empowered to actually do things.
Yep. And I also think this is a structure, Sarah, you were able to use that worked well talking to folks that were on the green team or that senior executive team. And so everybody kind of understands their role and sort of responsibility within the larger structure.
Exactly. Yeah. This was the key one for us.
Great. So thank you so much, Nick and Sarah, for this presentation. And just wondering if there are any questions out there at this point from attendees. You can raise your hand and I can unmute you. That would be the ideal way to do it. Or feel free to enter something in via chat. Any questions at this point from folks? Here's one. Just folks interested in the slide deck. We will absolutely make the slide deck available to everyone. I'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who was registered that will include a PDF of the deck, that will also include links to some of our upcoming webinars. So we've got a lot planned for this year, including an opportunity tomorrow to learn a little bit about our awesome Impact Unleashed gathering that we just hosted at the beginning of the month, bringing together a number of different innovators and leaders from our industry as well as others. Feel free to jump on that webinar and learn more about the experience and different ideas and tools that folks are engaging with moving forward. And also 2 more webinars ahead on certain impact performance areas of the QIA. Stay tuned for those and go ahead and register. I'll include links for that as well. Any other questions at this point from folks? See if anybody is raising their hand. Once again, thank you so much to Nick. Just a little bit about Sterling Consulting. Nick has been in the field for 12 years, has been a longtime partner of the PSC, and we really appreciate his expertise and knowledge, and is available to serve as a partner to you, our members, as well on certain projects. So last chance, any other questions at this point? Feel free to throw something into chat or onto the questions. Let's see. Saying awesome. At this point, I think we are probably ready to go ahead and wrap things up.